All right, this session, create a pipeline associated with a code branch. Okay, so this one is slightly more complex because there's a few variations to this. So very long ago, we didn't have cross-account deployment activities. Then we slowly introduced cross-account deployment approaches. And then more recently, we've adopted CDK, or going to adopt CDK. So in general, the idea is pretty similar across the board, but there's slight variations as we go along. Okay, I think I'll just cover off on, let's say, two. And I'll show you how these kind of play out. So, creating the pipeline associated with the code branch. Let's see where to start. Let's start with the online claims solution. Now this is the online claims solution, and when it comes to pipeline, so probably a diagram might help. Just one moment. Okay, so this is probably a nice way of showing you. Okay, so here you've got developers. So the developers are making changes to the source application code, right? That's here. And we're using code commit to save all of our changes and code. Then we have a process known as AWS Code Pipeline. So that's this whole gray thing. And this whole gray thing looks after the movement of application, and as it moves into the build stage, and then once it's completed the build stage, how does it move to staging, and then approval, and then how does it get moved to production? Actually, this is, let's see if there's a better example. Anyway, it'll be good enough. Okay, so this movement of different stages from source to build to staging to manual approval to production deployment, it's all handled by code pipeline. And so this whole process in itself is kind of like a solution in itself. It's a set of stages. So here you can see it's a set of 5 stages that have been sequenced together, and this sequence is all managed by code pipeline. Okay, and then in each of these stages, we've defined, okay, where is the code saved to, as in what repository am I going to retrieve my code from? Then during the build stage, okay, what tooling am I going to use to build this? And then staging, code is deployed and tested. So this is where we're going to be deploying our solution locally. So how are we going to deploy our solution? And then a manual approval, that's just going to be a manual check. And then production deployment, how are we going to do that? So all of these configuration items, as again, we've got 5 stages. So the configuration of those 5 stages, how they're linked up, how they're sequenced, what's the configurations or parameters in each of these. All of those are defined in a solution in itself. Okay, so this is just the process of moving the application code all the way through the 5 stages to a production ready state. And so this doesn't really have, I guess, direct impact to the application that is being deployed itself. So the developers could be simply configuring, who knows, maybe an S3 bucket or they could be defining a Lambda function, or they could be defining a Redshift cluster. It could be anything in AWS. And those items, those configuration items, are being moved from each of these stages from 1 to 5. And then once it hits the end stage, then you have your deployed resource. You have your deployed S3 bucket or Lambda application. Okay, so just to repeat that, you've got a kind of it's a CloudFormation template that defines the whole code pipeline process, the 5 stages, and the configuration of those 5 stages. Then you have a secondary CloudFormation template which defines what are the artifacts and resources that are to be deployed into production and their journey from each stage, from code all the way to production deployment. Okay, so the way that we've kind of defined or called these 2 templates is, one, the code pipeline template is just simply called the pipeline template, and then the components that are to be actually deployed, they're just simply called the infrastructure stack or the infrastructure template. Okay, so I'll go over to VS Code, and I've just opened up the repository. And so template.yml, so that's a YAML file. It's just a text format. It's a way of specifying various attributes and values. And in this template.yaml file is where we've previously been defining our infrastructure stack. So all the items that are in code that is going through the 5 stages, what are those things? So if we look through here, resources, we've got an IAM role that we want to deploy. We want to deploy a DynamoDB table. We want to deploy an API gateway deployment approach, another policy document, another role, and Kinesis Firehose. We've got all sorts of things. So this document is 1,718 lines, and it defines everything, all the resources that go into this solution to make it work. Okay, so this is called the infrastructure stack. Then we've got another deployment folder in this solution. It's just called toolchain. It could be called toolchain, could be called deployment.yml, could be called anything, but whatever the YML file is in there. If you look through this one, you've got resources, you've got a repository, and here you've got the code pipeline. So as I said, this is the pipeline stack, which just looks after the 5 stages, the sequencing of the 5 stages, and the configuration of the 5 stages. So if you look through here, you've got stages, you've got source, then you've got an image build, you've got a build stage, you've got all these different things, and eventually you get to a deployment and to a testing stage. So it goes through those multiple stages to take your infrastructure, which is over here, which takes this on a journey through the 5 stages to the point where it gets deployed into production and is ready for use. Okay, so going back to the original thing, so how do we actually deploy a pipeline for a given branch? Okay, so let's open up CloudFormation. Okay, so we've got the base one here. Let me see if I can. Let me just set up this environment. Let me see if I can actually any changes that are currently on the server. Okay. Okay, I'm going to create a new branch. Git check. Okay, so now I've switched to my test branch. Let's delete that file. Let's set up our virtual environment for Python. So it's m env. Okay, so now I've got my virtual environment set up. I actually probably didn't need to do that, but anyway, let's just continue. I've got my new branch. Let's just say I don't want to actually make any further changes. Git status. Let's push this branch back into the code commit. Okay, so what this is doing now, it should be creating a new branch. I should see a new branch appear here eventually. Okay, so I see my new branch that I've created. So the question is, so going back to the question, which was here, is creating a pipeline associated with a new code branch. So I have my new code branch. It's called test. Next thing is I basically want a, you can do it this way. Actually, let's just let it continue. So what you next do is, okay, so I've got a new branch. The definition for the pipeline should be in a deployment folder, or there should be some way to make a distinction between the pipeline or deployment or toolchain YML file versus the infrastructure one. Hopefully all of the code is synced up and saved, so you should be able to just copy. And then you should be able to go click Update, Edit in Designer, click View in Designer, and then just make sure it's selected on the Template tab. Then you can click All and paste in. And then it should check as valid. Then just click Create Stack. Okay, and so once that has done, it's uploaded the template that you had to S3 and saved it there as a temporary file. Click Next. Here you define what the branch name is. So for this one, we've used test as the branch name. The CMK is the KMS encryption key. So just leave this as default. This one is if you want to reuse a bucket. Let's just see what the other stacks have used. So this is the default branch, and if I go over to parameters, I can see that it's using this S3 bucket name. So I can use that one. Then subnet, I believe, is just application A and B. repository name, that should be left alone. Setup, just leave that as false. So this is just telling the stack whether or not it needs to create a new repository or not. But we are reusing a repository. We've already got the repository here, so we don't need to create it again. And then VPC, the one that isn't tagged as Cloud9 should work. Okay, and then you click next. All of these you should be able to leave. It's only the last checkbox at the bottom because you're making changes to IAM, which is the permissions, and just click Update Stack. All right. Now let's have a look at the pipeline itself. So going back to, I think I had that little diagram up here. I might have lost it. This diagram. So you can see code pipeline is the service that's managing the different stages, so the 5 stages, and then the sequencing between those 5 stages. So that's what we're going to look at. We're going to open up code pipeline, which is here, and then we can click on this one. So the name should generally correspond to the stack name and then the branch. And then you can see here it's got all of the different stages that it needs to go through. So here it's got a reference to the code commit repository, so that's where it's retrieving the application code. Then it goes through a process of building an image for testing. Then it builds the actual application code. Then it deploys the application using CloudFormation. So it will deploy the Lambda function, it might deploy the S3 bucket, those kind of things. And then once all of that's done, then it runs through some integration tests. So it would be testing through an API gateway endpoint to make sure that the application actually works as intended and gives the responses back correctly. And then later, it's really the cross-account deployments. So this is a manual approval stage. When the tests complete and are successful, then it'll get to this stage and it'll show you a little box to click, and you can either click approve or deny, and then that will simply continue to try to deploy the solution into the AWS base account, then the stage account, and then subsequently the production account. Okay, but yeah, so that's how to link everything together. If you want to kick this process off, you can click release change. I'll just let this go for a little bit just to make sure it is all hooked up. So you can see testing changes, I believe. Yeah, so what's happened is here, this change, I deleted that Q file and I added a diagram file. So it's just picked up on that. And it's going through the process of building an image. Yeah, but that's all I wanted to show in this session. I will just terminate this for the moment because I don't really need it to run. And to clean it all up, I should be able to go back to my pipeline, and I should be able to delete this. Okay, and also I'll go back and I will just delete that branch that I just created as a test. Okay, but yeah, that was how you set up the pipeline for a new branch that you create. So remember that in these solutions, you might be working with other team members, and each team member might be working on different features. So the way that we're not stepping on each other's toes and not breaking each other's code is we all work on separate branches or separate feature branches. And when we build and define our code, we have to also have a stable environment to work with. So a stable set of S3 and Lambda functions to work with to make sure that they're all communicating well with each other. And so that's why we set up a separate pipeline. So it's a separate CloudFormation pipeline stack. So again, you'll see in here that it's prefixed with pipeline. And then normally you'll find that all of the other infrastructure stacks are not prefixed with pipeline. They either have infrastructure or they just have dev dissent and the name of the repository at the end. Yeah, so that was about it. Yeah, till the next one. Thanks. See ya.